Yeah, and some of that provides this false security. Like for me, my parents were so drunk. I was like, well, I'm never going to be as bad as they are. But as time goes on, you know, I was living in Whistler, and it's definitely part of the culture there. And then I was, you know, professional circles, conferences, there's wine, there's, you know, industry sponsored events, and you're always drinking, and you're sort of like, well, I'm not as bad as them, so this is just part of what everyone's doing. It'd be just this false sense of security that it's not going to become a problem for me because I'm not like they were.
Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. And for all those people watching us from around the world, they say, we know where Canada is, and British Columbia on the west coast, right? Right. And then Prince George. Where is Prince George? Well, we are, if you know British Columbia and you know the big city called Vancouver, we are 500 miles north of Vancouver, or 800 kilometers for our friends in Europe. And Prince George, about 80,000 people, beautiful community, lots of timber and trees. Within 50 miles, we got 100 lakes and lots of friends, black bears, grizzly bears, caribou, deer, foxes, wolves, you name them all. We have them all here. We call it paradise. Today we got a very interesting guest, and our guest today is from British Columbia, and her name is Veronica Woodruff. And Veronica is a Canadian author, a public speaker, and an award-winning professional whose career spans to leadership, environmental science, and civic engagement. And so she wrote a book, and the title to the book, we'll talk about that a bit more, is Blind Drunk. Interesting. So I said, is she blind? No, that's the title of the book. And so Veronica is going to tell us about it, and obviously being an author and a speaker, she has a very, very interesting background. Veronica, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us a bit, for our guests watching us, more about you. You had an interesting background, and did you grow, and you're from Whistler or
Pemberton.
Pemberton.
Yeah.
And Pemberton is in southern British Columbia, north, a little bit outside of Whistler.
That's right.
And about hour and a half from Vancouver by
right.
car?
Yeah.
About that, right?
About that, yeah.
And so were you born there?
I grew up in Toronto. So in Toronto and the greater Toronto area.
Right.
So that's where I grew up. And my background is in environmental science. So most people who I know are like, oh, you wrote a book, must be about nature.
Right.
Well, it's not about nature at all. It's about alcohol. And I was lucky enough to secure a publishing contract around this idea of a cultural review of alcohol in society. And I grew up in this really interesting way in Toronto. My father was a very wealthy man. He was a corporate lawyer, grew up with modest parents, both him and my mom, in Quebec City, went to law school at Dalhousie, and started working for some very large corporations. Started in Venezuela working for the company that would eventually become Nortel. He moved on to Kresge's, which started to bring Kmart's across Canada in the 70s. And that expansion of Kmart's was a really big deal at the time in the 70s because this was a new way to shop, and people were really excited to have this big floor space. And he was wined and dined by developers all across the country, and political representatives like mayors would come and give him the key to the city, including the key to Prince George. He received the key to Prince George for bringing the Kmart here in the 70s.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I grew up in this, what started as a very wealthy family.
How many siblings?
Well, I have a brother and sister. I'm the oldest. We're all adopted from different families.
Okay.
So my mom couldn't have kids, and they were well-to-do family, and they wanted to have a big family, but my mom had some challenges with endometriosis, and wasn't able to conceive. So they ended up adopting me and my sister to start. And actually, I tell this story about my brother in the book. Her gynecologist said, you know, that you're having all these complications with the endometriosis. We should really do a hysterectomy. And she's in her mid-20s. She's feeling like, oh, this is such a drastic move. I really wanted to maybe have my own children one day. And she goes for the hysterectomy, and her gynecologist, who she's been working with for years, comes in. He says, Diane, do you want more children? And she says, oh, I just wanted the biggest family. And she's like, well, this woman came in 4 days ago and had a baby boy, and she wants to give it up for an adoption. So would you like this boy? And she left the hospital. She went in for a hysterectomy and left with a baby boy. So in terms of like adoption policy in the 70s, a little bit different than today.
I would say.
Yeah.
And so he became the oldest boy then in the family?
He was the youngest. So
the youngest boy.
My sister and I had already been adopted.
Okay.
And then we were suddenly a family of 5. Yeah, unexpectedly.
And so then your dad, the successful lawyer, immensely successful, meaning lots of meetings, lots of interaction, and alcohol became part of that.
Absolutely. So alcohol is a cultural prop, really, especially, you could go through really any sector in society where alcohol plays a role. But with my father, so in the book, I decided to focus on the culture of the 3 martini lunch, because this was a big deal because it influenced tax policy from different presidents, from Kennedy to Carter, saying we're subsidizing the businessman's $80 3 martini lunch. So, and my dad was a pro at this. He knew that to be successful, you had to look and act successful, and that included being able to drink martinis. And gin was their drink of choice. So they were big drinkers
Gin and tonic or gin?
Well, in the mornings it required a splash of OJ, but then the rest of the day was just gin on ice. So as much ice as a glass would hold, and just filled with Beefeater gin. This was their drink, and ultimately led to their demise.
So then my dad had issues with alcohol. It's not uncommon then, and as you may know, I grew up in Holland, and I was born in 1940, so I'm nearly 85 years young, I call it, and I don't drink actually, so although I did at one point, it was part of my life too. Fortunately, I saw my dad relying on alcohol, but it was mainly after work in the evenings, but it was a regular routine. Also kind of a gin, in Holland we call it Genever.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of a gin. I think it's, I never acquired a taste for it. I never drank, I just didn't. And so, but I saw things happening, and I decided that will not be part of my life until I came into some challenges in my 50s, and then became reliant on Scotch and water, actually.
Right.
I was drinking, and but then fortunately I had a girlfriend, and then I cared about her a lot, and she kind of said, she dumped me actually. I was smoking, pipe then, cigarettes. I was drinking too much, and I was on Xanax. Xanax is very addictive, although it was prescribed.
Right.
And so she kind of, I always say, she hit me with a 2x4 across the face, and that got to me the message. She dumped me, and we're married now. We've been together for over 40 years, and in 1 week I stopped drinking, never drank again. I stopped smoking, and the hardest thing for me to quit was Xanax, but I stopped that as well.
Great.
Yeah. So I was lucky, but the point was that I had seen it in my family, and not to the extent that he would go around the street and walk around drunk like a thing. But there was a dependency on alcohol, very common.
Yeah.
and even in my earlier life here, alcohol very, very common.
Yeah, and some of that provides this false security. Like for me, my parents were so drunk. I was like, well, I'm never going to be as bad as they are. But as time goes on, you know, I was living in Whistler, and it's definitely part of the culture there. And then I was, you know, professional circles, conferences, there's wine, there's, you know, industry sponsored events, and you're always drinking, and you're sort of like, well, I'm not as bad as them, so this is just part of what everyone's doing. It'd be just this false sense of security that it's not going to become a problem for me because I'm not like they were.
So how did that go, Veronica? So with your parents then, he was doing well, financially doing well established, but it started to affect everything, right?
Absolutely.
Because it usually does, right? So tell us about that.
Well, it wasn't until I was about grade 7 that the cracks started to show. So we had a beautiful home just outside of Toronto. We were all going, my sister, brother, and I were all going to private school.
8, 9 years old were you?
Yeah. And, you know, just probably creeping on 10 years old, 10, 11. And then we got evicted from our first house. We got evicted. And this was the first time of many that ultimately got evicted many times. But my mom had no idea. She just, this woman came to the house one day. She says, I'm putting the for sale sign up. And my mom was taken aback. She didn't have any finances. And when I talked to her, my father passed away in 2009. My mom is still alive. So I talked to her extensively when I was writing the book. And she just had her credit card. She had her access to money, and she had no questions because she lived this really privileged lifestyle. She had her personal shoppers at Bonwit Teller and Sexsmith Avenue, and she had this lifestyle that she just thought would continue forever. So when the cracks started to show, she didn't have any access to.
So what then happened with your dad? It started affecting his job, his profession. So did she not know? Or did she not want to know?
I don't think she wanted to know. I think it was easier for her to just be, and my dad was a big personality. You know, he was a big guy. He was a huge personality. And, you know, if he didn't want to talk about something, the conversation was closed. Like he was deep voice, commanded a room. And so he didn't offer up the information of what was happening, and she sort of went along.
So with my experience with my dad, it was something you did not talk about.
Yeah.
You know, so that in the evenings, what did we do? The bottle of Geneva, gin in a way, came out and sat next to him, and then he started, little drinking cups, and not to the point where he was going like this, but gradually and you would not talk about it.
Yeah.
It was not something that you would say, well, don't do this, or if there was no alcohol, that would be a problem.
Yeah.
That had to be that alcohol there. It was walking on needles or eggshells in a way that's an issue didn't discuss.
Yeah. Yeah, and my mom and my dad were partners in drinking. Like they both drank gin.
Yeah.
They both, my mom was like a classic 60s, 70s beauty. She was tiny, ate like a bird, was always really slender and beautiful. And she just she was drinking as much as, probably not as much as him, but just straight gin, you know, that weighs heavily on a slight woman that isn't eating very much. And so she would be in bed earlier and have long naps during the day. And I think she chose not to know or ask any questions.
So you were 7, 8. I forgot now your brother and sister. How old were they?
There's 2 years between us. So my sister's 2 years younger. My brother's 2 years younger than she is.
But you were then at the stage that I noted from myself. Even I already at the age of 8, 9 years old, I was aware of things that were happening around me.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I talked about this in the book. There's an example of they had a massive party with valets and I remember it was like the 80s, and so the caterer had made these like caviar checkerboard. So it was a red and black checkerboard toast, and so hundreds of people. And my mom had epilepsy, and as a epilepsy. So as a child.
So what is epilepsy?
Epilepsy, it causes seizures. So, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and the seizures can also be brought on by heavy drinking. And I'd woke up as a child, and I saw my mom around with strangers surrounding her in a seizure, and I couldn't understand what was happening. It was really like, it was just so. It's just that image is really burned in my mind, and so that was sort of the first time that I was like, there's this big party, there's all this fanfare, there's all this drinking, and then this is what I see. So that was the time, that was a shift for me, where I was like, I need to start making sure my mom's taking her medication, so she's not going to have a seizure. You start to think like, I need to help look after my parents. Like, so that was a really, it was an interesting, inciting incident around the shift in being the child versus recognizing you have to take some responsibility for your parents.
And now you're 7, 8, 9 years old.
That's right.
Yeah, and I can relate to that because, that, and I speak about that. I grew up during the Second World War and saw fortunate they should not have seen.
Absolutely.
We had, my mom and dad were married in 1938. They were happy, they were in love. My dad had a job at a lumber mill. They rented a small house very quickly. They had a boy and a girl. And then my mom was pregnant with me in early 1940. And then what happened is the dictator Adolf Hitler decided in 1938-39 that Poland should be part of Germany, and then the next thing is that he put his focus on Western Europe, and including Holland, and then my dad was called into the Dutch army,
Yep.
In April of 1940, and the last time they heard and saw him was just before the bombing of Rotterdam, when the German, Hitler didn't find that they capitulated quick enough for him, so they bombed the center of Rotterdam. They killed thousands of people. And so for 5 years, my mom would not know if he lived or died. Was then pregnant with me still, and then 2 little kids. And then we went through the hunger and no food and anxiety and all of that kind of thing. And then after he did come back, and then they worked hard, but then gradually, he never talked about the war, but then gradually from the time that I became aware about your age, that we were liberated on April the 12th, 1945 by the Canadian Army, actually, as part of the Allied forces that liberated us, and it made such an impression on me, 5 years old, that I knew from that point forward that when I grew up, I would go to the land of my heroes, Canada. And I wanted to go when I was 17, but they wouldn't let me, say it's too young. And then I was drafted into the Dutch Air Force for 2 years, and then I did go to Canada when I was still 23 years old, and then ended up in Prince George, but that's a different story. But in any event, but even during that period, my mom was always, they didn't have a whole lot of money. My dad had a good job, worked very, very hard, and they didn't have many people around them. But my mom had always health issues. And so I still remember the anxiety of sitting in an ambulance with her, going to the hospital, going to school, and having anxiety in kindergarten even, that my mom would not be okay. So I would leave school, because I had, and then later on, much later in life, about all of that, I got counseling for, when I was in my 50s, actually, here in Prince George, got counseling for the inner child.
Right. Yeah.
So it always stayed with me. So then from there on in, gradually, what I then remember from the time that I was about your age, maybe a little older, the reliance on alcohol, not my mom, my dad, but it was always something, don't even mention it, don't even make a comment about it. And had created friction inside the family between a brother that I had and the family, mainly about alcohol issues or usage, that was troubling. So
yeah, because you want to understand, why are you choosing the alcohol piece over me as a, at any stage of life? And so that idea of like alcoholism as a disease model versus just a choice. I'm going to choose this and not this.
Yeah.
That as a child, and it's sometimes challenging to understand that, and like to make it feels so hard. It seems like a simple decision for you to look at a parent and say, please choose me, like choose stability, and like.
No, you were affected by it as well, and so did I. And for me, it was more than anything that anxiety about other things than when I already was here, probably in the mid-90s, trying to struggle with issues around the companies. Then I had, all of those kind of things got to the point where I started gradually to become dependent on alcohol. And then it became a habit. And it kind of shielded me in a way from reality, maybe. I don't know. I would not walk around drunk or go someplace and be drunk. It was just me in my house. And by then I was living on my own. And, but then I can see, looking back, where it became a reliance on it gave me a sense of false, obviously, comfort that I developed that reliance on the Xanax for one, and then alcohol in particular.
Well, there's no like hard line, like you're addicted here and you're not here. So that's a nuanced stage where you're between dependence and non-dependence, or casual use and dependence. So that is not a very, like, there's just not a defined line there where you can be one or the other. And so that idea that alcohol it's a bit insidious that way, because it does creep in a little bit, becomes more of a habit, and then and especially if you're using it in a way that is like a socially acceptable, like I've just had I've had a stressful day, let's have a glass of wine. Or for mourning, like for celebration, for a big recreational day, like let's go a big mountain bike and have some beer, and so it just becomes part of your culture, and and you don't see it until it's 3 a.m. and you're chugging water and you're like, I'm not drinking tomorrow. Like you just sort of start to question those day to day, like is this serving me still? But it's hard to ask yourself that.
So tell us a little bit about your family then. So what happened then? So now you had a reliance, and so did your mom, and then she had the issue with potential seizures and health issues. So how did it go forward from there?
Well, when we were evicted from the first place, that was our most stable home with my life with my family. And my dad was well-to-do. He had a lot of very wealthy friends, and he was able to borrow money and offer up a piece of artwork as collateral, and he had
improvising.
This exactly, and he had decades of legitimacy behind him, so people were helping him out. You're hitting a bump in the road.
That's a bump in the road.
But he never was able to recover from that first initial eviction, and obviously he was struggling. He was able to start to get some work, and it's all a bit.
Still relied on alcohol?
Oh yeah, the alcohol never left. So he was still drinking a lot. He, once we were evicted from the first place, they had rented a place, and then we borrowed a cottage in cottage country from Toronto, and we were driving, an hour and a half to and from this cottage to go to school every day in my grandmother's light blue Pinto with no muffler, which was like social suicide in grade 8, and at a private school. And so my dad was such a proud person, like to ask for favors or to ask for money or help, or, you know, he had such disdain for the welfare bum and these ideas of people that needed help. And he ultimately, through high school, it seemed like he got on his feet by the time I got to grade 9. We moved to Oakville, and we were living in Glen Abbey. They host the Canadian Open Golf Tournament there, so it's quite a lovely neighborhood. And we're like, okay, we're back on track. We have this home. But within the year and a half, we were evicted again, and we were in a motel, and it was so clear that they weren't going to recover from this. They were drinking more than ever. And as a young woman who's like 14, 15 years old, and you're living in a one-room motel with your brother, your sister, 2 dogs, and a cat, and your parents, I was like, I can't live like this. So I ended up going into the social system at the time, which was a little bit more flexible, I think, in the 90s.
So what does that mean, the social system? Because there you have, although you were adopted, but for all intents and purposes, your family were the 5 of you.
Absolutely.
And you had already, that's, in your mind, that's your family.
Yeah, yeah. And I knew I was adopted as well, like from a very young age. My mom told me, and I was like, oh, well, you're my parents.
So to then go into what you call the social system, to me, that would mean, okay, you're leaving the family, and I'm not sure where you're going to go.
Well, I wanted to leave. I was so stifled in that setting, and I wanted
you could see it.
I needed to be somewhere else. Like I just couldn't function like that. So I got student welfare. And so I went through the counselor.
14, 15?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was working at the mall after school, and I was getting $300 in welfare, student welfare, working at Things Engraved, like engraving pens and cutting keys. And the system at the time paired me with this Australian couple that were in their 20s, and we lived near the mall, and I had my room. I rarely saw them. They liked everything ironed, so they would pay me a carton of cigarettes to do all their ironing for them. That's the only interactions I had with them, because I used to smoke back then. And just that I sort of lived in that limbo for about maybe 6 months, as working at the mall, going to school, and then my parents seemed to get back on their feet. We have a house, come live with us. You don't have to be paying rent. All these things. Moved back in with them. 6 months later, we're evicted again.
So where was that?
That was on Lakeshore Drive in Oakville. So a really well-to-do neighborhood. And so an enormous, beautiful, like light blue Cape Cod home, and like 4-bedroom home in one of the richest neighborhoods in Canada. And my dad, they just couldn't help but spend money. There wasn't this idea where I need to hold on to my money and make it last because I'm unsure what's going to happen next. It was like, oh, I'm back. I'm going to go to all the fancy restaurants, and I'm renting this house. And there was this chestnut tree at that house, and it was dropping chestnuts on the deck, like almost the first meal we had there. And he was like, we need to cut this tree down. And he cut this old growth cut chestnut tree down, cost $5,000. And we were evicted 5 months later, and so this idea is like, I'm going to fake it till you make it. They would go out to the pub, buy everyone rounds, and then basically destitution. So that was, and then from there I moved in with friends, and I was able to, I just had a really good network.
What happened with them?
They ultimately, my sister was helping them a lot, and my brother was still with them, and they ended up going into getting welfare and moved into Hamilton housing, so government housing in Hamilton. And that's at every social level that they kind of that preconceived notion, okay, well, this is my block of people now. When they got into the welfare block of people, they would be welfare Wednesdays, they'd have money, they'd go to the pub, they'd buy everybody the beer, they would still play this facade of the importance, make-believe, and not just there was no planning for the future. It was sort of living in the moment at all times.
Yeah.
So
no matter what happened.
No matter what, and
knowing that likely will go is just like you're going to the cliff, and again you're going over the edge.
Yeah.
Climb back up again and do it all over. So then, Are they still around now?
Yeah, my mom is around now. My father passed away in 2009, but they just were in Hamilton housing the whole time, and they just lived in. They never really recovered from that initial. My dad wasn't. He would have little stints of having a job, but then he was just such a drinker, you know, like that gin was such a part of his persona.
Alcoholic.
He was a true alcoholic, yeah.
Yeah,
So.
and I've seen that in my life. Is my dad always was an alcoholic. Reliance on Geneva, you know, that's a form of gin, I believe. I don't know exactly. So that's what affected you. So now you are a young lady and you 15, 16, 17. So then what happened to you? So now you were going to university, and so you knew you had to, with that history behind you, you know, so how did you go about going from there?
Yeah, it's a case for reinvention, right? I was waiting. My friends were going to English programs at universities or arts, and I was like, I don't know what I want to do. And I came across this pamphlet in the school counselor's office for this Fish and Wildlife program in Lindsay, Ontario, at Fleming College, and it was all this technical field work, working with nature, and I was like, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
I got a student loan, moved up there at 18 and started to go to school. I was like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to become some kind of science professional working with nature, because I'd always had this obsession with nature. My mom and dad were like highly cosmopolitan. Like they don't think they've ever stepped off the concrete. They never wore a pair of jeans. Like that would just be like fashion suicide. So they just never wanted to be in nature. And I felt like that's like this nature nurture thing.
Right.
I really wanted to be in the woods. I was obsessed with maps. I loved seeing place names on a map, like Rattlesnake Point or, you know, Moose Lake. And I'm like, wow, I need to go there. I just really loved being in the woods. And so this program was like a really big jumping off point, and met, you know, I had boyfriends throughout high school and college. And then one of the guys I'd been dating, he's like, hey, you've been talking about going to BC. I'm going there on my motorbike. Do you want to come? You can go in the back. And I was like, yep. Because I was finishing school. I had nowhere to go. I had no home. I had nowhere to live. And so I jumped on the back of that motorbike and we drove from Ontario to Whistler.
To Whistler?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so when was that?
1995.
1995.
Yeah.
So you came to Whistler at the right time, because that was the time that Whistler, you know, which for the people watching us from around the world, Whistler was then a skiing resort that was in the process of expanding, globally being recognized as likely one of the most beautiful skiing areas. I've skied there. And then an amazing place to invest in real estate, and still is today, and all the things around it. And so tell us further, is now you're still fairly young, you're going to Whistler. What did you do there?
Yeah, it was like college without the school. It was, you know, we lived in the dorm, we worked for the mountain. It was drinking beer, it was the skiing, the camaraderie that like really intense recreational activities builds, and also then of course the après ski, and it was so fun. It was so fun to be there. It was a smaller resort at the time, even though it had just been voted, you know, North America's #1, and that started to build. So it was a lot of building almost immediately, and so just got to be part of that, and you know, started to work in service because that's where the money was at, around waitressing and bartending. But in the summers I got a job with the municipality in Whistler, and I started tagging fish, which I'd gone to school to do. So I was able to balance this kind of like summertime professional job with this bartending in the winters, and it was really kicked off a beautiful life.
And then, so that took you to when?
well, basically to today, still doing all those things.
So when did you start worrying about alcohol even more?
Well, I mean, alcohol is just, it's the visitor culture, the recreational culture, even the professional science culture. Like it's just part of all of these different sectors. And this was a really interesting exploration to do that within the book around the culture of alcohol, and not in a demonizing way. Like even my publisher was like, I don't want to publish a book that's like, you too can change your life if you quit drinking. She's like, but if you want to do a cultural review of what alcohol looks like in society, great idea. And so that's what I've done, tied to memoir. So I explored some of the stories around Whistler and kind of that mountain recreational culture, but also some other, different sectors there, like first responders and even my own science background, academic background. So yeah, it's my life in Whistler. Alcohol wasn't flagged for me as an issue for almost 15 years because there were so many people that were drinkers, right? So there was always somebody that was more drunk than I would ever be in my whole life. So you just, when you have a social setting where there's just alcohol is part of it, it's easy to ignore your own consumption. And when you look at the guidelines, like you look at federal guidelines at the time, it was like, well, anything more than 4 drinks is a binge for women, 5 for men. And it's like, 4 drinks? Like, are you joking? That's not a binge. Like, watch this, So the guidelines at the time didn't really reflect what was actually happening in my social settings. And it just kind of like crept in. And it was about when I was 30, I was like, I wonder if I'm drinking too much. And I asked my doctor, I was like, how do you know if you drink too much? Like, because there wasn't a lot of tools or information. You're either an alcoholic or not. Yeah. And, AA didn't resonate with me. My dad quit drinking for like 3 months. He told me, and he was like, oh, I quit drinking for 3 months. And I was like, wow, Dad. He's like, yeah, I went to AA, but I got to this step that I had to admit that my alcoholism had affected other people. And obviously that's not the case. And I was like, what? And he couldn't see how his drinking had affected anybody in his life. He definitely did have narcissism. He wasn't empathetic around how his behavior influenced others. And so I just was like, okay. It didn't sit right with me that you had to distinguish yourself as I am an alcoholic and you are not. That never resonated with me, and as a way to really reflect on how much was too much. So I asked my doctor, and she says, well, we can test your liver, or you can take this drug that makes you sick if you drink. And I was like, oh, well, neither of those sound good. Don't worry. I'll check back in a decade. And then it was just sort of status quo. You drink wine after work, socially, you're on party weekends, some weekends. It's not like you're just part of the social scene. There's no like paper bag in the park. You're just drinking like normal, like everybody else around you. And there was a triggering incident for me. And I've come to think that everybody that is drinking some level of alcohol beyond, 1 or 2 drinks a month, let's say, that you're sort of on this trajectory, and that it's so insidious that it can just keep creeping in. And so you might live your whole life and never have an issue, and you're going to stick to your one glass of sherry after dinner every night, or it's going to creep in, and it's just going to start to become more and more, and it's going to start to drive your behavior. And then if an incident occurs where you suddenly, this is what you're going to use to help you cope. So for me,
when my girlfriend hit me with the 2x4, right?
So it suddenly, it was easier, right? Like this is what I've come to know as this comforter, this way for stress relief. And for me, I was going to be the keynote speaker for the BC Snowmobile Federation. They had their conference in Pemberton, and I was doing this talk around the importance of volunteering, and I was going to the conference, a nonprofit that I started in Pemberton. We were going to do the catering in the night and all these things. I was like, oh, I should grab a cooler. I ran back in, grabbed a cooler, threw it in the car. Hadn't been drinking at all. And it's about, 10, 11 in the morning. And I had an old dog, 12 years old, Samoyed, beautiful dog, Fisher. And he was having hip issues. We had done a knee replacement, and he was always he wasn't mobile. So he was always on his bed. Look over, Fisher's on his bed, pulling out like not even 10 feet, and he scooted in front of the truck, and I ran him over. And I broke his hip. I know I'm going to cry. This is so long ago. It's like 10 years ago, and it still makes me teary. And I I broke his hip. We put him to sleep in the moment. Oh my God, I was so devastated. And I just went into a mode where I was like, I'm drinking, because I cried myself to sleep for so many months, and I just would drink. I still had a highly professional job at that time. I was working for a really well-known environmental consulting company. I was working through the province as a project manager on some big industrial projects. And so 5 p.m. would arrive, and it'd be like, it's time to drink. And so I was only drinking between 5 and 8, but you could drink quite a bit of wine between 5 and 8 to go to sleep without tears. And about 6 months of that, I was like, okay, this is too much. I knew it was too much, and I knew I wanted to stop drinking at that stage. So it was that really tragic. That was the trigger for me. That tipped me over the edge. And
then you knew, and then you had the willpower, because you likely look back to what has happened to your mom, your dad, and your life, and now you were at the point where, unless you stop now, it would be just further down, more and more, and it would start affecting everything around you.
Well, I actually don't know if I ever reflected on them, because I felt like they were still so much more than I was, because it was gin, it was 24 hours a day. And but my drinking, like even some nights you'd have like a glass of wine or two, and then some nights it'd be like, whoa, I just drank the whole bottle. And so I just knew that I wanted to change. And I had a friend who was a bar manager that we'd been friends. We'd worked together in the 90s. And so this was about 2016. And I asked her, she had quit drinking for about 5 years, still managing the bar. And I was like, how did you quit? Because I knew I wanted to, but I didn't know how. And again, AA didn't resonate. And I couldn't afford some kind of like $20,000 intake of rehab. And so I was like, okay, how did you quit? And she said, I read this really great book. So Annie Grace wrote this book called This Naked Mind. And it talks about the biases around drinking and how powerful your brain is to, you're making decisions even unconsciously before you even consciously know you've decided to make that decision. And she'd written this really interesting book around how you think. Not what you think, but how you think. And this is where the title of the book comes from, because I feel like I was blindly drinking because of the social expectations of, I didn't question why I was drinking and what the implications were. And once, in Annie Grace's book, where it's like, you start to look at media, how alcohol is portrayed in media quite positively in many ways, professionals on like all kinds of dramas, like let's have a glass of wine. It's a very important conversation. Get the wine. We have a problem to solve. Get the wine, get the scotch. And I just started to look for those cues, like, okay, why am I choosing to drink in this situation? And this idea of learning how to think changed my whole life. Not only just in my relationship to alcohol, but how I was in relationships with my family, as a mother.
And all the things that you did, right?
I just really started to make me realize I needed to address how I thought more consciously. And there's a ton of really interesting business books around there, starting with Peter Senge and his ideas around mental models and, understanding systems thinking. And so it set me off on this decade of really trying to understand how I thought about things.
So if I kind of look back in terms of dependency like that, the other struggle that I had coming back from the war years, academically I was not a success story because of ADHD, likely. I failed grade 3, failed grade 7 3 times. They said, this guy's not going to amount to anything.
Right.
You know, so, and I always felt that I was just as smart as all the others, but I've struggled with over my life right up to the time that I discovered that I had ADHD. Actually, I picked up this book in a bookstore here, Driven to Distraction. And I picked this book up in January 1997. So I was already here for 32 years. I was 57 years old. And as I read the book, and I wrote in it, in the store, Books on 3rd here in Prince George, I wrote in it in Dutch because I was implied to be, it was a mental disorder of some sort. So that now I finally know who I am, January 1997.
Yeah.
Is that I was struggling with the idea of who am I? And that kind of unlocked part of that.
Yeah.
The other one was, getting counseling for the inner child, helped me in that process. And then I was not a very good communicator either. Communication to me was difficult, even when I was really successful. You said, oh, you got all these companies so successful. I didn't feel that way. Is that I was okay, interacting with 3 or 4 people in my companies, but not outside of that. And until an ex-sister-in-law that in 1989-ish, she said to me, I want you to come with me to an organization you call Toastmasters. And I said,
Oh, yeah.
what is that? I never heard of it. She said, well, it's about communication skills. I said, are you going to ask me any questions? She said, no. You just sit there and then you just listen and then you see if you like it and maybe come back. And I said, okay. So I went down there and then halfway through the meeting they said, hey, John, tell us all about you. And I said, oh my God, I'll never go back here. But I did. And I stayed there for 10 years and then became a distinguished Toastmaster, which is the highest level in Toastmasters, for 10 years.
Yeah.
That changed my life.
Yeah.
And so combined to all of that in some form or fashion, alcohol for a period played a role. And the underlying issue to me was, who am I? And it took me probably even after I had this book here, and I was 57 years old, then 5 years later, after I understood it more, what was ADHD all about, and Googling and doing research on it, then I started to realize it's a superpower.
Great.
And so then from there on in, that kind of started changing my life. And then, then after 5 years, when I was already 62, I went to my dog, that was a personal friend, delivered our 2 daughters actually, and he said, hey John, why are you here? I said, I think I got ADHD.
Right.
So we checked it out, and I do.
Yeah.
And so that has become part of my life. But combining it all, looking back at alcohol played a part in my life as I grew up, and it was very, very delicate issue to talk about it. A lot of times walked around on eggshells, and saw that as part of my life, committed to myself that would never happen to me, and then slipped into that and during a very, very difficult time. Fortunately, my wife, Sharon, dumped me, so he hit me with the 2x4. She said, no, you're done. And so then, obviously, I then made a commitment to me more than anything that I would never do that again, never smoke again, never have Xanax again. Xanax was the hardest one, and never drink again. And so I haven't. So but on the other hand, Veronica, and you probably feel the same as I do, is that when I came here, no different than it is in Holland, is that when in the lumber industry, and I've been here for 60 years in Prince George, being in the lumber industry was very common when I first started here, and I didn't drink then at all, that, you sit in somebody's office and it may be 8 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, and say, hey, you feel like Veronica, have a drink, and the drawer goes, what would you like to have?
Yep.
And then say, oh, okay, there we go. And that was very commonplace.
Yes, absolutely.
And the same here. You know, the drinking is very much part of it. In a lot of cases, it probably is in a lot of other places as well.
Yeah.
And it has the potential that as you become committed and then go beyond thinking your dad, to a certain extent, my dad, although it probably did, and it did affect his family, it did affect his relationships, but it always was part of it, and that eventually it's a spiral that goes down, 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 further and further.
Yeah.
And so that brings us to, so there you are, successful, and you read the book from the lady that motivated you in terms of not to what to think, but how to think.
Right.
And rationalize in your mind. And then at some point, you then concluded, I must write a book about it.
Well, yeah, I wish it was that easy, because I read the book. I quit drinking for 6 weeks, and I was like, that's pretty much, other than being pregnant and breastfeeding, that was the longest time I had not had alcohol. So I was like, whoa, I did it. Like, and then my best friend's birthday was about 6 weeks later, and we went out for dinner. I was like, I'm just gonna have one glass of wine. Like, I've just done 6 weeks. That's amazing. And I had one glass, and then of course this is in October, and then by Christmas I was drinking just as much. It's like it just sort of crept in, like one bottle of wine for the week, and then it's like, well, it just like. So I realized I actually quit, and then I didn't quit again for another 9 months. And just again, I reread the book, so it was so effective for me, the book. But I also read so many different stories. There's so many great books out there around, like Ruby Warrington or Craig Beck, like all these really great books around people's journey of trying to quit alcohol. And so that was important. And then also, I went and saw a counselor, which I wasn't interested in seeing a counselor because just growing up in the system, you're sort of forced into seeing counselors where you're just like, ugh. And I had seen this one counselor the whole time between high school and this moment when I was quitting, who I went and saw her, and you tell the 15, 20 minutes of your life story, and she pulls out the chart, and she's like, okay, well, your parents are alcoholics, and you had this abandonment issues, and so you're going to have these issues, this and this. And I was like, whoa, you know what my issues are? And of course she did, because people study this. They've spent their whole lives dedicated to understanding human behavior. And that moment in time, even though I didn't enjoy the session, it was like, we have knowledge as humans. It's limited on how people think, but I need to link into this more. And so I did get the support of a local counselor to really help me get over this alcohol addiction. So I did, and I haven't had a drink since 2018.
Going on 7 years.
Yeah. So, and I feel like I've accomplished so much. I've been able to accomplish so much since quitting drinking, because, even this book, it's like, I did my master's, I wrote a frickin' book. Like I've been able to do so much. I just feel like putting that behind me, and in a way where I could really reflect on the positive pieces. I do see people that quit drinking that they just know that they have to quit, but they haven't changed their minds about how important it is to them. And you see that they just yearn for it. They want to have it so much still. They haven't made peace that you are better without it, and you are lucky that you no longer have to drink. So it's like that shift in mindset. So I feel like I've come full circle, and and again, like there's no judgment space. Like I know a lot of people that it's hard for them, like, or they're not interested in quitting. It's part of their persona, and there's no
But the
judgment
other
there.
part that is important, I believe, I wrote a book about living young, dying old. And this picture of me, actually,
Amazing.
I'm the oldest competitive bodybuilder in North America. And that was not the purpose of the book. The purpose of the book is saying that even at the mid 80s, everything is possible. And healthy fitness, health, are to me very, very important. And everybody goes through certain triggers. The one was with Sharon, obviously, when she hit me with the 2x4 way back then. And then the other one is that in 2008, I had a case of diverticulitis that is rupture, potentially, of the colon.
Right.
And you have to attend to that very, very quickly. Otherwise it may kill you because it attacks all the other organs. And I'm not a doc, but my understanding, and so I got operated on that, and then they took 20 centimeters out of my colon. And the doc the following morning, because I was well over 48 hours, that very painful, but I have a high threshold for pain, not good. He said, you came this close. So, and that gave me the message, it's now time to do. But my wife is a vegetarian, so I started looking at diet. I became much more listening to her, so I'm an 80-20, I think. The other one is, I did like a lot of other people do. They go every year and we say, we're going to do this, that, and the other thing, and then I'm going to buy a membership to the gym.
Right.
And then 2 weeks later, we can find 100 reasons why we're too busy to go to the gym. So from there on in, I knew what I had to do, that it became then, and that's what this book is all about. It's about longevity and quality of life. Not about age. Everything is possible, but diet, fitness. So what I do now is that what are important, at least in my opinion, is vitamin D, either in sunshine or in some other form or fashion. The other one is to get sleep. I sleep between 7 and 9 hours a day is very important in my opinion. Diet, extremely important. Amazingly, I do all the shopping, even for my wife. If I go to a store, I stay on the outside of the store. I don't go to the aisles where the processed food, super processed, because if you don't know what is in it, it's probably not good for you. And then, the other one is that I go to the gym, and then I take that very serious. And obviously, when I first started in 2009, after I recovered, after being with the trainer for about 6 months, somebody came up to me and said, hey, John, have you ever thought competing? I said, me? Yeah. I said, well, why not? So I did that, and then competed bodybuilding physique. Came in second bodybuilding third in physique in Northern British Columbia, the same in the province, qualifying for the Nationals in the Arnolds.
Amazing.
And then COVID came, and now I'm back again training, for 2086.
Amazing.
Or 2026.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so all of those things, like what do you think about mindset? Because it feels to me like that is the other piece too, like just to have a positive mindset was really important.
It's to me, it's this one here. When I came to Canada, I had I wanted to start with nothing because everybody said, he's not going to amount to much, because failing grade 3 and failing grade 7 3 times, So anyway, but I always knew that I was just as smart as the others. So when I came to Canada, I had a suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and then I couldn't speak language, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job. Didn't know anybody, and then when I came to Vancouver, I knew I wanted to go to the West Coast. I wanted to build a lumber mill, and so I took the train across Canada, and the 4 days, 5 nights. My God, that's a long way. And when I came to Vancouver, went to the immigration department, and fortunately there was a German. I couldn't speak English, so the German fella, and I told him I want to build a lumber mill. Go to Prince George, he said.
Right.
That's what I want, and I came here 60 years ago. Can still see the Greyhound station behind us somewhere, a couple of blocks away. And when I came off the bus, I counted my money at least 3 times. I had $25.47.
Amazing. I love this attitude.
Yeah. But the other part that I had, and always have had, attitude. I will always think positive, even when When everybody said, "Oh, you will not amount to anything, and you will never be successful," and blah blah blah, I always believed in me that I would, but I had to start anew again, because in Holland was always, no matter what you do, the question is always, okay, where are your diplomas? Well, I didn't have any diplomas,
Right.
so and so, but I have attitude. I'm always positive. Most of the times, the other one, passion, whatever I do, I give it 125%. Work ethic, I work harder, even still now, than anybody, is that I get up at 5:30 in the morning, I always make my bed, and I always think I'm late.
Right.
And in the meantime, after all of this, the Toastmasters, and then finding that I'm fortunate to have ADHD. I call it a superpower.
Yeah.
And so then from that point forward, my companies became more successful. I'm an author of this one book, two books, one on ADHD. This one, Finding Your Passion, Living the Dream, and then the last one is this one. This one came out, and then I have another one that's coming out. In July, actually, is this one here.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, and that's Billionaire, about communication skills are critically important.
Yep.
And so that's kind of the way I see it. And then the other one, obviously, that's why I'm interested in, when Scott mentioned that you were here, you wrote the book. It's a topic that I am familiar with, and to have the opportunity to do the interview. Tell us a bit more about the book.
Right. Well, I've sort of told you a little bit about the story. So it's really a memoir.
Yeah.
It sort of traces my life story, but paired with a cultural review and the latest research.
Right.
So, I do like writing academically. This is not that, but I have been able to infuse the entire story with all of the things that I really like to read around the latest research, fascinating research that's out there that influences the way people behave, whether that's around, extreme sports or choices to drink alcohol. Like I was able to put it all together in this one story.
So what do you want the person that buys the book, that reads the book, what would you want them, as you said in the book that you read, about developing your mindset, made such an impression on you, it still stays with you today. What do you want people to conclude, or what will they learn from your book?
Well, I think one of the reasons that the book is landing well with people is they can see parts of themselves in much of the story.
Right.
And the idea isn't demonizing alcohol, but just really having this really conscious relationship, this conscious approach to drinking and what it means for yourself. And even as a non-drinker, like someone that doesn't drink, you still are infused in this culture. So that is part of being a drinker, is being a non-drinker at the party. So I was able to go from really consider a lot of different facets of alcohol in society. And I'm hoping that people walk away from the book first enjoying the story, and then also just having this opportunity to take the opportunity to be more reflective about alcohol in their own lives.
And the book is available at all the classic places?
It's available anywhere you buy books.
Okay.
I have a publisher, Tidewater Press, out of Vancouver, and so it's available anywhere in the States, Canada, any local bookstores, and of course on Amazon. And I'm looking forward to it. If any readers out there that's inspired to review, I'm on Goodreads and I'm on Amazon. So yeah.
And then the other part about it is that I believe always is always interesting about books, because what is the size of the book? What should be the font? Should there be pictures in the books? How about the title of the book? And I thought the title of the book is important. I said to Scott, I didn't know she was blind.
Right.
You know, so, but the title is interesting. How did you come up with the title? Because it is one that catches my attention.
Well, I had written a tester of the content for a newspaper. I did a feature story for the Pique Newsmagazine that was shared widely, and it was called Blind Drunk, and it was a battle with my own subconscious was the title of that article. And so this idea of blindly just choosing to imbibe, even when it's not serving you any longer. So I really loved that title around just, you know, obviously it's play on words because of blind drunk being the wastoid, but it was also just blindly imbibing without conscious thought. So that's where the title came from.
I like it. Mm-hmm. And then the other things that you have to figure out about the book is the size, the pages, and you know, 4 drinks isn't a bench, is on the back, and comments about that. So the book, I recommend it to everybody. It's available to everybody. The other part about my book I just want to quickly show you is that, because that's another part about it, is so this is one of my books that I've done. And then the other part that I was going to show you is that, what is the price of the book?
Oh, $25.47. Amazing. Love it.
I do that with all my books.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, my publisher, she really helped me. I am notoriously bad at the creativity side of it. I'm quite a black and white thinker.
Yeah.
So, you know, my artistry is in writing. It's not in visual art. So I did have a really good publisher, copy editor that did all the layout, helped with the design. So.
And it takes a team, right?
It takes a team, yeah.
So that is no secret about that. So I recommend this for everybody to check it out. And then obviously Veronica's book applies to globally, really to did you do the audio of the book?
The audiobook will be out in the new year. And so the Kindle version's available now, but the audiobook will be out in the fall.
Okay, and then potentially in other languages too, because it applies right across globally.
Oh, absolutely. And I did try to touch on some like UK pub culture and, you know, a little bit about the French culture. So I did try to be more global also in the review.
And this is my copy, and you're going to sign it for me as well before you go, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Excellent. And then for all the people watching us and listening to Veronica's story, and it's obviously very, very interesting, and you know, but it's always important for people that podcasting like ourselves that to subscribe to our podcast if you like what we are doing on the Brink, and share it with others. Like it if you like it. Give it a 1 or a 2 if you wish, or a 0 if you say no, that you should change something. Whatever it may be, share it with us, and then give us comments about it. And again, Veronica,
thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. I'm going to give you a big hug.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
After we disconnected. Thanks for having you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.